I'm Mark Golub, and election 2016 is in one of its two celebratory weeks, as Republicans have gathered in Cleveland to nominate Donald Trump for President of the United States. And what a ride it's been getting here. I don't know if there's ever been as fractured a national party convention as this Republican convention seems to be, with many of the party's leading figures, including two past presidents and the most recent Republican presidential candidate, joining those Republicans who are boycotting this convention because they are so opposed to Donald Trump's candidacy. And suddenly, many Americans are questioning the wisdom and efficacy of the Democratic primary process. Many in the Republican Party establishment are aghast at the people's choice that's come out of this primary season. Nor should we forget that on the Democratic side, it was only a short while ago that Bernie Sanders was criticizing the Democratic primary system, calling it rigged. No one seems to like the political primary system any longer, though no one seems to have a better suggestion as to how each party should choose their candidate. It would certainly seem fair for party members to vote in primary elections and for the candidate who receives the most votes to become the party's presidential candidate. But everything about this political year seems to be a bizarre anomaly, and it's being played out now in Cleveland at the Republican National Convention. And as we always have said on JBS, the question here is, what's it mean for the American Jewish community? And how are Jews who support the Republican Party reacting to Donald Trump as the Republican candidate? Well, for some first-hand information, we go on our JBS phones to Cleveland, Ohio, to speak with one of this nation's most outspoken columnists, Jennifer Rubin, a self-identified conservative journalist whose blog for the Washington Post is entitled The Right Turn. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
It's nice to be here, Mark.
So, Jennifer, you recently wrote a series of columns slamming Donald Trump, calling him an incompetent candidate, and ridiculing the way in which he introduced his running mate, Mike Pence. And you say Mike Pence has already become intellectually corrupted. So you've made it crystal clear how you, as a conservative, feel about Donald Trump, and you write that you expect upwards of 90% of Republican Jews to vote now for Hillary Clinton. Explain to us, why are you so vehement in your opposition to Donald Trump?
Well, I don't know how much time we have. It's a long list. Very succinctly, I think he is temperamentally unfit. I think he is willfully ignorant of most of the major issues. And I think he intentionally feeds racial, ethnic, and other divisions in the country. I also don't think he's much of a Republican or a conservative. And as we've already seen at this convention, we're going to have a very difficult time having some of these stalwart conservatives get up there and say things that are true to their own beliefs without contradicting the party's presumptive nominee. So I think certainly the Republican Party as a whole is going through a tremendous amount of angst. You're right, this has never been a more divided convention, and I've been to a few of them. I think you're not going to come out of here with the never Trump or the not Trump people satisfied. There's very little, I think, that Donald Trump could say at this convention that would mollify them, because they know who he is at this point. He's said too much. He's revealed too much of himself. And I think the difficulty for him is that it's virtually impossible to win a national presidential election for a Republican unless you have upwards of 90% of the Republicans, plus a lot of crossover Democrats and independents. So it becomes very hard for him, no matter how irritated he is, let me put it that way, that Republicans aren't getting on board. but he needs them more than they need him at this point. And I think it's a frustration to the campaign, but they have a candidate who's not emotionally, intellectually equipped to soothe and woo people who are critics of him. He is not very good at tolerating dissent.
Jennifer, how do you explain the fact that he won the primaries?
Well, he won with a plurality, not a majority. He likes to brag that he got 13 million votes. 17 million Republicans voted against him. It was a peculiar year, to put it mildly, when you had 17 different candidates, many of whom refused to get out after they really had no viable path to the nomination. And I think, on one hand, he captured the zeitgeist, a rebellious nature amongst the voters and frustration with Washington. On the other hand, I think he also benefited from a divided field for reasons that some of us find hard to believe didn't uniformly attack him, but attack one another.
I understand. I don't understand, though, the reference to the plurality. That could have been true for any one of the 16, 17 candidates that began the process. He was running against many people. Obviously, no one was going to get a majority. But whether it's a plurality or not, no other candidate did as well as Donald Trump in the primaries. Why?
I'm not arguing that somebody else did better and should have the nomination. I'm simply pointing out that Donald Trump really did not capture the majority of the Republican Party, and he still has a substantial amount of dissent in there. I think you can look at the candidates in a couple ways. You can point to individual mistakes or individual quirks that each one of them displayed, or you can simply say this was a abject rejection of the political class as a whole. And he was the most virulent critic of Washington, the most unpolitic, in both senses of the word, person on that stage, and in a rebellious mood, that's the person they picked. The problem for him, as I said, is if you're only getting in the high 70s in terms of Republican support, when Mitt Romney, who after all did lose, got 93%, and you're doing horribly with African Americans and horribly with Hispanic Americans, you're going to have a really hard time putting together a electoral majority.
Yes, but I don't think anybody disagrees with you at the moment. This political year is so bizarre, who knows what's going to happen, but I believe you've expressed it very well. And I don't mean to sort of bludgeon you with this. I'm only going to ask you one more time. You say maybe people were just fed up with the political establishment. Whatever happened to Donald Trump could have happened to Jeb Bush, to Marco Rubio, to Ted Cruz. It didn't. Magnetism, whatever enthused the Republican base that was voting in these primaries, Donald Trump excited people. He was getting crowds like we've never, ever seen. And although everything you describe about him is correct, the reason why I keep pressing you is, are you ultimately saying that people who voted for him were voting in some way stupidly?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. To go back to the first part of your question, the people that you listed, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, could not have done what Donald Trump did because they're professional politicians. Even Ted Cruz, who kind of ran as a non-politician politician, is a politician. And I think this was the year where they wanted someone who was clearly not a politician. As far as the voters make mistakes all the time, and parties make mistakes collectively. That's why you have landslide elections. Because of the way the Electoral College works out, it's hard to get a majority or a victory in November as clear-cut, if you will, as Reagan, for example, in 1984, or George Herbert Walker Bush in 88. But nevertheless, if the purpose of the primary is to pick someone who's going to win, yes, the Republican electorate, in my view, blew it.
Were you going into this primary season, were you critical of what's been called the political establishment?
I don't exactly know what that means because it's a term that everyone uses to refer to somebody else. Quite frankly, we have not a great crop of political leaders these days, but I also think that people have come to misunderstand the nature of governance and what politics is all about. We have, I think, lost the capacity to listen rationally and to meet others halfway. We've become so polarized, and this comes from the electorate, not from the elected leaders. We've become so polarized. We've geographically separated ourselves from one another into red states and blue states, and even within those states separated ourselves. For example, in California, where the coast is all blue and the inland valleys are red. We've done a great job of separating ourselves, isolating ourselves, listening only to opinions that confirm our pre-existing beliefs. And as a result, you have a political system that is really frozen. It's not only the Republican Party that suffered from this, of course. It was the Democrats as well. Bernie Sanders was the mirror image of Donald Trump. And the reason Hillary Clinton won, frankly, is that the Democrats have a different system for picking presidents. It's all proportional, and they have what are called super delis. So they have a similar problem, or had a similar problem. They nevertheless had a candidate who overwhelmingly had the money in the organization. Of course, didn't have 17 people that were there. She just had to beat one guy who was a pretty extreme character. So I do think that the frustration with the political system is legitimate, but I think the expectations are wrong and misguided. The Republican base who claims that they were betrayed by Republican leaders have it wrong. The Republicans don't have the White House right now. They're never going to repeal Obamacare. They have the Senate and they have the House. And you can criticize both leaders for getting more or less of what they think they could have done. But in point of fact, our government works on collaboration, compromise, with a checks and balances system. And the notion that because you believe really strongly and can yell really loud about your views that you get everything your way is not going to work. And I think the president is not a particularly compromising personality. And I think the politics on both sides of the aisle has gotten such that we've managed to paralyze ourselves. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, I think the politicians are at fault, but I think the very people who are screaming right now that they're so angry are part of the problem too. We have to figure out what kind of politics we want and whether that middle that we've always been able to join together some level, whether it's Bill Clinton, whether it's the first term of George W. Bush, whether that is possible. If it's not, because we're in a lot of trouble. And part of the reason I think that we've had this paralysis, that we've had this very difficult political environment, is that the trust factor and the cynicism is so high.
Yes.
I think people simply think these people are all thieves, scoundrels, and in it for themselves. And when you have that, you can't have an operative political system. If you're not going to trust people to exercise their judgment and to tell you why they're voting for something and why they think it's good for the country, then I think democracy does break down. And I think we have a severe governance problem, but really a citizenship problem as well. And it's a factor, I think, of that people no longer look at politics as transactional. In other words, what problems can you solve? They look at it as a way of expressing their identity.
By the way, as you look at the way in which so many people now are really, as you are, vehemently opposed to Donald Trump's candidacy, do you feel that on the one hand, the novelty and the luster has worn off from what it was during the primary season?
I think to a certain extent, but I think what's really going on is that he's playing in a different pond now. He got 13 million votes. He's going into a general electorate where he has to get 65 million votes or more. And he's now having to deal with people who aren't Republicans, who aren't favorably disposed towards some of his more extreme positions. So I think he probably still has intact his core support, but that's not enough. And we talked earlier about the mistake that Republican voters made. I think the mistake was in thinking that there were 65 million people who think like they do, and that this person was going to find a majority of Americans to vote for him. I think that's highly unlikely at this point.
Okay.
And so what you're seeing is him getting more intense support, but not really expanding.
Okay. By the way, then, Jennifer, you expect this to be a blowout for Hillary Clinton, don't you?
I don't know if it will be a blowout in the sense that I think Donald Trump will get at least 100 electoral votes. It's hard to believe that even he could blow a state like Texas or some of the other southern states. But I think, and he will probably run up the score in some of those states, which makes the popular vote a little bit closer. But I think Hillary Clinton is going to win, how shall we say, comfortably, without breaking the sweat, and the Republicans are going to have to fight like the Dickens to hold the Senate because he's going to be running 10, 15 points ahead of Donald Trump in some of these states where Republicans need to hold the Senate seat.
So what do you think Republican Jews feel now about Barack Obama?
I think they are exceptionally depressed. They went through 8 years with a president that really did not turn out to be as advertised. He had a very acrimonious relationship with Israel. As you know, American Jews don't necessarily base their vote on Israel, and many of them have other priorities from abortion rights to the environment to the economy. Right now, his overall poll numbers are looking better because the candidates are looking so bad. But overall, I think there's been great disappointment. There's been great disappointment on the Democrat side concerning his stance towards Israel. But I think what they see now, to their horror, is someone who they feel would be not only bad for Israel, but bad for the country and bad for the world. And you're going to have many of those same people. I know many of them who were very vehemently anti-Obama, in particular on Israel, who are going to say, you know what, looking at these two candidates, the lesser of the two evils is Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so let me ask you, how do you think Jewish Republicans feel Hillary Clinton will compare to Barack Obama?
Rightly or wrongly, there is the widespread belief that she will be, quote, better than Obama, that she has a deeper connection to the state of Israel, that she will not have an acrimonious relationship with the elected leader of her only Democratic ally, that she appreciates to a greater degree the threats that Israel faces, both physically as well as internationally in forums like CDS and other attacks on the legitimacy of the Jewish state, that they certainly think she feels differently. I think they're hopeful that the relationship will improve. I think her rhetoric during the campaign has been to the right of President Obama on many foreign policy issues, in particular Israel. So I think as much as the Israel issue, I think you're going to see his whole persona really be a bridge too far. You know, it's interesting, in 2012, Mitt Romney raised several $1 million from members of the Republican Jewish coalition. This year, he's raised a few thousand. And that's Republican Jews. So if those people are not opening up their wallet and they're saying, well, maybe I can't vote for Hillary, but I'll vote Libertarian, or I'll just leave that blank. If those are Republicans talking to you, you can imagine what independents and Democrats are saying.
All right, I want to articulate for you what I hear those who are both troubled with Donald Trump, but more troubled with Hillary Clinton and will probably vote for Trump say, and then I want to hear you respond. What they say is, number one, you know, it's like we had Elliot Abrams on. He's a lifetime diplomat in the Republican wing of the government. And his answer to me was, I'm not voting for anybody. I can't vote for Trump and I can't vote for Hillary. There are those who argue that there still is, that no president is king, and that in essence, a president does set the style of the nation for a period of time, but that there's no real damage a president can do. But there's one thing a president does do. that President selects members of the Supreme Court. And the Republican Party has had a philosophy and has argued that it's very important that Supreme Court justices be appointed who have a certain orientation to the Constitution and to the American future. You are a self-identified conservative. You are going to vote for Hillary Clinton, who is certainly not going to appoint Supreme Court justices who will represent your perspective on America. How do you deal with that problem?
The first answer is I don't believe Donald Trump is necessarily going to be all that much better. He put out a list. He doesn't know any of those people on the list. He doesn't know who any of these people are. If Nancy Pelosi came to him and said, appoint a liberal and I'll get the votes to build your wall along the Mexican border, I think he'd do it in a flash.
But you do know, Jennifer, you do know who Hillary Clinton is going to appoint.
So I think what you're saying as well, there's a chance he might do the right thing. I suppose so. I guess we just threw darts at a board. But obviously my concerns about Trump go far beyond who you're going to appoint to the Supreme Court. And I think you're going to have a president who doesn't even recognize the power of the Supreme Court. Is he going to abide by a ruling the way Obama abided by a ruling that said his immigration plan was unconstitutional, illegal? I don't know. When you talk about law and order and respect to the Constitution, the bigger issue is what if you have a president who's not going to abide by the court? And that, I think, is a monumental problem with Donald Trump, in addition to all the other problems. The court is important, very important, but frankly, a lot of other things are important too.
More important, basically more important, correct? They're more important to you.
There can be issues at various junctures that are more important. I think at this point, in terms of foreign policy, we are at a huge juncture. People act like this one open seat on the Supreme Court is going to be forever, and it's the only seat that's ever going to open up. Over the next 10 years, you could have lots of openings and lots of presidents, and the balance could come back to a more conservative court. So to say that because you want this particular seat at this particular time, you got to vote for this guy, I think is extremely short-sighted.
Okay.
The problem, the essence of the concern about the Supreme Court has to go with the notion that we live in a government of limited powers, of respect for the rule of law, and that the Constitution has a defined meaning. Donald Trump, who thinks there are 12 articles of the Constitution, has no idea what the Constitution is all about. So as much as it pains me to say this, Hillary is much more likely to abide by rulings of the Supreme Court with which she disagrees than Donald Trump is. And she is much more likely to act within, I would say, the normal parameters that presidents do in terms of testing the limits of their powers, working with Congress, than Donald Trump is. And I think he does have a very authoritarian, very misguided view of how government works. And I think that is as dangerous, if not more so, than the court itself, than the particular person who fills one particular seat on the Supreme Court right now.
Okay. But what's the mood right now in Cleveland, Jennifer?
I think it's anxiety. I think certainly there are people who, like Trump, they voted for him, they're happy with him. But I think there is this grave disquietude. This is not an ebullient place, as it usually is. These people, by and large, have been in politics most of their life. That's why they're here. That's why they became delegates or operatives or lobbyists or whoever they are. So these are sophisticated people. I think they realize that the Republicans are in a lot of trouble in November. I think they realize that the candidate who, yes, many of them and their fellow Republicans voted for, is going to walk out of here as the nominee. But I think people are also smart enough to know how problematic he is and how problematic he is for some of the views that they hold. People who think we should have free trade and limited government and entitlement reform and all the things that they got into politics to pursue are not things Donald Trump believes in. So you have a group of people who think, he's terrific. You have a group of people who say, well, he's going to lose, but life will go on. You have a group of people who say, well, maybe he'll win, and then we can control him somehow. I'm not sure how that's accomplished. And then you have a large segment of people who wouldn't show up. In fact, I have a piece coming out shortly. It's basically on all the people who didn't show up, not just the candidates and the officials, but the operatives, people who have worked in the trenches for years and years, and they just couldn't bear to show up. And so I think I've never been to a Republican convention with this sort of mood, I must say. Rightly or wrongly, they're always convinced that they're going to win. I think if you polled the delegates, there'd be a very high percentage of people who there's not going to be a winner on the Republican side this time.
Yes. Jennifer, it's been a joy meeting you and hearing your analysis. You write a fascinating column. I hope you'll let us call you again, talk about other issues having to do with the State of Israel and American Jewish life. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to the next time.
I do, too. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Jennifer Rubin, whose blog, The Right Turn, appears in the Washington Post. And boy, if there are Jewish Democrats listening to Jennifer on JBS right now, they should be dancing in the aisles. Because if you listen to Jennifer, it's over. Very often, elections become much closer as they continue, but it may be that in this instance, the last anomaly of this election season will be a one-sided win for Hillary Clinton. We'll have to keep watching. The Democratic Convention comes up next. As always, my thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director, production coordinator Serge Goldberg, editor Dennis Golan, JBS's Associate Director, Dara Golub, and the producer of Election 2016, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.